Such institutions are crucial to preserving freedom in this country. The title of my talk today is Lessons from Latin America for the US. And some of you are no doubt wondering what Latin America could possibly teach the US. After all, we have our muscular constitution, our independent central bank, no snickering please, limits on federal government power, and open markets. Well, I was once like you. But then Barack Obama was elected president, and I began to see scary parallels between this country and our neighbors to the south. Now, to be clear, those parallels did not begin with this president, but they have become more pronounced under this administration. During his first campaign for president, I wrote at least a couple of columns in which I said that everything that Barack Obama wants to do in the United States has already been tried in Argentina. The fashionable explanations for Latin American underdevelopment are things like corruption, lack of education, poor infrastructure, and my personal favorite, a shortage of money, which, if you can believe it, we are told causes poverty. We are told that it's a shortage of money that causes poverty, and this means that if we give countries money, poverty will go away. And of course, the great development economist, Peter Bauer, who was also the winner of Cato's, the Cato Institute's Friedman Prize in 2002, famously pointed out that a shortage of money is not the cause of poverty. A shortage of money is poverty. But I digress. All of these things, corruption, lack of education, health care, poor infrastructure, even poverty, are symptoms of bad policy. And what about that policy? Well, I like to sum up the bad policy of poverty by the 3 Ps: populism, protectionism, and prohibition. And if you ever find yourself confused about why rich countries like Argentina and Venezuela are poor, just refer to the 3 Ps. You cannot go wrong, believe me, I tested the theory. Most of us already know this. We know that populism, protectionism, and prohibition are all bad for development. And these are the things that we proponents of liberty often find ourselves talking about when we struggle to make things better off. How to open markets, how to keep politicians from turning us into dependents of the state, and of course, how to change drug laws so that organized crime doesn't replace our democratic institutions, something that is a big threat in Latin America. I'm fine with all that. I mean, that's one of our roles. But I'm increasingly convinced that we're still very far from the source of our troubles when we address threats to liberty in this way. What I've come to appreciate is that just as corruption, lack of education, poor infrastructure, and poverty are byproducts of the 3 Ps, the 3 Ps are also a byproduct of something else. Something else much more fundamental that has gone wrong in the region and that also threatens this country. So I ask you for a minute to just focus on 2 things. First, to borrow a fundamental principle of the Cato Institute, ideas matter. I think we all agree on that. To be more specific, which ideas prevail in society, which ones are considered legitimate and moral, that's what matters. Secondly, focus on the fact that without entrepreneurship, a society cannot achieve prosperity. Impossible. Now look at Latin America. If you look past the immediate problems that I was just outlining, you will find that it has been the ideas from academia and from intellectuals more broadly that have played the key role in undermining the entrepreneurial culture in Latin America over the past century. Ideas that are hostile to entrepreneurship are not only part of the popular culture, but they are embedded in the constitutions of these countries. These ideas hold that profits are morally suspect. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is what strikes directly at the heart of property rights and therefore prosperity for hundreds of millions of Latin Americans. So how did this happen? Well, let's first start with the famous John Maynard Keynes, easy, calm down, quote describing the power and influence of intellectuals. And this is a direct quote. This is in the very end of the general theory. The ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. Indeed, the world is ruled by little else. Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influence are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. Madmen in authority, we won't mention names, who hear voices in the air are distilling their frenzy from some academic scribbler of a few years back. I am sure that the power of vested interests is vastly exaggerated compared with the gradual encroachment of ideas. This is a truism that Latin Americans did not understand until it was too late. And it is how we too will lose if we don't pay attention to the importance of making the moral case for the market. Let me show you how I know it's true. Latin America, as you probably know, Latin Americans, I should say, as you probably know, have no problem being entrepreneurial. Immigrants to the US have a long history of starting their own businesses once they've landed in this country. So how come they don't display these same skills at home? I submit to you that it is because the dominant ideas in the region over the last century have been hostile to entrepreneurship. And if you doubt this, have a look at the new book by the Mexican historian Enrique Krause, titled Redeemers, and subtitled Ideas and Power in Latin America. The book profiles 12 individuals who Krause believes represent the major political ideas in the region from the middle of the 19th century through the 20th century. He starts with Jose Marti and ends with Hugo Chavez. He includes profiles on Eva Perón, Che Guevara, Octavio Paz, who, by the way, toward the end of his life was a liberal, but was not a liberal for most of his life, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and then Bishop Samuel Ruiz, who sort of laid the groundwork for the uprising in Chiapas in 1994, and Subcomandante Marcos, who was actually the leader of the uprising there in Mexico. These individuals, Krause tells us, were the ones who sowed the dominant political ideas over the 20th century. No name listed here is an entrepreneur, an innovator, a builder, or a merchant. And these idea men, and one woman, promoted collectivism, equality, and the socialization of risk. It was the dissemination of their ideas that molded the norms and values of the rule of law. The power of ideas was well understood among intellectuals in the left throughout the 20th century. They made it their business to get control of academia, and they succeeded. And Venezuela is a prime case where they got total control of the education system through the universities, and I think they're reaping the gains from that right now. And in the classroom, a new narrative emerged. It gave the moral high ground to the state and denounced the market as immoral. Millions of Latin American students have been marinated in this morality, which views government as the source of justice and the market as greedy and wrought with failure. This climate has had a profound effect on the political climate in the region. As Enrique Krausse shows in Redeemers, intellectuals opposed to classical liberalism, working in the name of something that he calls Latin American nationalism, began to appear in the earliest years of the 20th century. Krausse believes it was a backlash against the US victory in the Spanish-American War. But whatever the reason, nationalism's economic counterpart, which is socialism, then got a huge boost during the Great Depression. The Smoot-Hawley tariffs hit the region hard, and Latin American policymakers retaliated by closing Latin American markets. For those who had resisted this nationalism and had tried to spread and continue the fight for liberalism in the region, American protectionism made it more and more difficult for them not to give in. Now, today the ideas of Che Guevara and Eva Perón are discredited, and modern socialists, and by those I mean people who reject communism and fascism but favor some other form of collectivism that doesn't go by those names, they do not attack private enterprise head-on. That would be suicidal because the market has created so much prosperity. If you doubt this, I refer you to The Virtues of Capitalism by Arthur Selden, who was the brains behind the Thatcher Revolution in Great Britain. He does a magnificent job of outlining just how much prosperity the world enjoys today because of the market economy. Most socialists concede Selden's point. They recognize that the market economy is what produces prosperity. So they ask us not to look at the wealth of nations, but instead to look at what they call the morality, or perhaps more accurately, the immorality of the inequality produced by liberty. This, for socialists, is the soft underbelly of the market and the best place to attack. Now, in societies where the morality of the market is well understood, vigorously defended, and imparted to young minds, the ethics of collectivism doesn't do very well. But Latin America can show us what happens when the morality of the market is not defended. And this is a very important point. Even if a society makes economic gains by adopting pro-market policies, if the population is not convinced of the morality and legitimacy of the market, it will want to destroy what it has achieved. And I think the best evidence of this is seen in Chile over the past year, where students have been running wild in the streets, making all kinds of demands from the government, and claiming that those who won't give in are immoral. What is tragic and most disturbing is that the establishment in Chile has not been able to defend the market, starting with the president. Instead, it's back on its heels making excuses. I think we can be thankful for Jose Piñera and a small group of like-minded Chileans who are still carrying the torch, but they are greatly outnumbered. This is in Chile, the poster child of our ideas, the place that has done the most to reduce poverty in the region. I mean, it's really unbelievable. But I remain convinced that the problem here is that while many Chileans are beneficiaries of the market system, they have not been convinced of the morality and the legitimacy of private property ownership and differing outcomes. Outside Chile, things are even worse. In most of the rest of the region, intellectuals brought this idea of equality as the highest goal from their ivory towers to big government through the region's constitutions. These constitutions, which are perpetually rewritten by academic and intellectual elites, always strive to make state-sponsored equality the law. And of course, who can object when the goal is to make it law that the poor child should have as much as the wealthy entrepreneur? The problem with a constitution written with the objective of creating equality of outcomes is that it cannot guarantee individual rights. And that means that the world that Arthur Selden described, that world of glorious prosperity, is not possible because you cannot have it both ways. Latin American constitutions are hundreds of pages long. They have objectives like guaranteeing national development, eradicating poverty and substandard living conditions, promoting well-being. The 1988 Brazilian Constitution gives citizens the constitutional right to education, health, work, leisure, security, social security, protection of motherhood and childhood, and assistance to the destitute. The Constitution guarantees minimum salaries, year-end bonuses, overtime, and vacation pay. The culture section of the 1988 Brazilian Constitution charged the government with protecting Brazil's cultural heritage by means of, quote, inventories, registers, vigilance, monument protection decrees, expropriation, and other forms of precaution and preservation. And my favorite is, in the section dedicated to sports, the Constitution specified that, quote, the government shall encourage leisure as a form of social promotion. That's in the Constitution. So if you think about all this enshrined in the Constitution, you can easily see that the government not only has the power, but the obligation to use coercion to reach its goals. And this is the fundamental problem of Latin development. There's a lack of liberty which emanates from constitutional mandates that intrude on every aspect of human action. Now, I just want to say one thing about people outside of the intellectual elite. Of course, what I'm describing originates with the intellectual class, but it's also clear that many of the ideas in Latin America gained a lot of influence because the business class joined in. And I want to give you an example of what happened in Venezuela. The 1961 Venezuelan Constitution was, by most accounts, a fairly sound document. But that didn't mean that factions, as Madison might have called them, didn't have reason to try to pick it apart. And they did. For 40 years, the Constitution was under assault, particularly private property rights. And of course, the left wanted to undermine the rule of law and property rights, but the business community helped. And here's what Carlos Ball, who's a Venezuelan journalist, now lives in the United States, very good on this subject. Here's what he wrote about the slow deterioration of property rights in the 1961 Constitution. See if you think it sounds familiar. Many in the business community did not rebel against the growing state intrusion because they saw it was easier to convince one cabinet minister than a market of consumers. I'll never forget watching Venezuelan businessmen cheering the nationalization of foreign oil companies, not realizing that the politicians would soon come after them with more controls, regulations, and taxes. Close quote. And of course we know that the government of Hugo Chavez has subsequently done much worse. So in closing, I just want to say that when the state gets the moral high ground in matters of personal decisions and property rights, there are no end to the steps that it will take to contain liberty in the name of social justice. And if you need an example, just look to the region to the south. Once this happens, standard of living will necessarily decline. Now, you may think that can't happen in the United States. I am nowhere near as convinced. Thank you.